I'll go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode. Today, I am meeting with a good friend of mine. His name's Dean Christensen. And Dean and we've been friends for a while. He's one of my left leaning friends. I like to have people that are on both sides of the spectrum. Although, Dean, you're not like some crazy radical, though. I don't think that I would put you in that box, right?
Always cracks me up when someone calls me left leaning, but it's all good.
So, what would you consider yourself? Someone was asking you about your political kind of where you're at. What would you describe yourself as?
I've actually taken I don't remember what the name of the test was, that grid test to see where you're at on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm usually just slightly left of center.
Hey, that's
You know,
that's a that's about where I would have pegged you. So left leaning, but I know some people say they're left leaning, and it's like, no, you're a full on like
Although
revolutionary. But you're not at that point. I know that.
it's funny because my daughter once gave me another test. It was an online test. This was back during the Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton primary
Uh
and
huh.
2016, and I took the test, and it said the most preferred candidate, and including Trump and all. It said, that Bernie Sanders is the person that I would prefer. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. So
Well,
I don't know if
maybe you're
these
a little more
tests are
radical
very
than I thought.
yeah, I don't know if these are as reliable as some of them say they are.
I know. Well, hey, other thing I thought I'd kind of mention about you. You have a nonprofit, the International Association of Near Death Studies. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the overall organization. I work with the online. It's a fairly new program. We have online groups, and we have online speakers, and it's kind of been um, perfect for this particular COVID
Yeah.
2020 year. So yeah, I know it's a little eccentric and a little unique to some folks, but it's been something that I've been interested in since I was probably somewhere between 19 and 21. I picked up my first book about someone who allegedly had an experience that they died and claimed to have been somewhere else outside of the physical world, and then they ended up coming back to their physical body. And so, yeah, I've been fascinated by that, and I've been studying that topic for years. So I do some volunteer work for the International Association for Near Death Studies.
Very cool. And I want to let everybody know that Dean is also a musician. So, what's the name of your band or your albums and things? Tell me a little bit. What is that?
I always refer to myself as an amateur musician. I got a couple little projects. I'm a singer-songwriter. I perform at a local coffee shop here in downtown Gilbert every Friday morning. Been doing that for a year and a half, 2 years now. And so I have that, and then I also have, you can see it listed on here. I don't know if they can see the chat portion, but I have my other projects more electronic. If you've ever heard of Depeche Mode,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I'm not saying that it sounds exactly like that, but it's in that
That that
electronic alternative sound.
that
Hmm.
genre. No, that's great. And just so you guys know, everyone, I'll give my little plug. Dean is very good with music, so I always enjoyed the stuff when he goes live and things. And if you are in the Gilbert, Arizona area and you want to check out the coffee shop, what's the name of it?
It's Bergie's Coffee House, Bergie's Coffee Roast House, something like that. But just look for Bergie's,
Uh huh.
Bergies, and it's a really, really cool outdoor patio slash little venue. And if you come to Arizona, downtown Gilbert is kind of a neat place to
It
to
is.
come. It's become just ask Jacob. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's downtown Gilbert's a cool place. I always liked being around there when I lived in Gilbert. Well, anyway, let's get kind of into the topic here. So we're dealing right now with the situation where it appears that Trump has lost the election. Obviously, people on the right side of the spectrum are disputing that. However, we're going to operate in this discussion under the assumption that he did indeed lose the election and things move on. And so the question that I want to kind of look at is, kind of what next, right? And specifically, I want to get your perspective from kind of the left side of the spectrum. Um, what do you see as kind of the direction that the Democrats and President Biden, if you were in his shoes, what do you see as the things that they need to do in this post Trump world in order to, everyone's talking about the division and the polarization. What do you think they can do to help in that situation? Any thoughts?
Well, first, let me preface this by saying you need a couple more panelists because I'm definitely not your far left person. Um,
Well, good. I want to hear
I
what the
don't,
moderates think.
can you? Yeah, I would say I'm a moderate Democrat. So I don't know. Um, it's interesting because I remember. I mean, it just seems like the case after every presidential um, changing of the guard. There's the speech, and there's a lot of that good vibes, and at least especially if you had voted for the new president, and and it always seems like there's that initial energy. You can hear it right now from President Biden. I'm going to kind of end the years of caustic leadership, and I'm going to bring in. I'm not a president for Democrats. I'm a Democrat, but I'm not a president for Democrats. I'm for Republicans and Democrats. That kind of verbiage.
Mm-hmm.
And I genuinely believe that he means that. But I think once you actually get into office, and of course, I think he's pretty familiar since he was vice president for 8 years. He's probably familiar with intentions, and then there's the political reality of Congress and how our political process works. And so, unless it's 2008 and you have a majority, you either have a choice to work across the aisle or kind of do what I believe Donald Trump has done for the last 4 years. And of course, he did have a majority, right, the first 2 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, he just had his own style of leadership, which wasn't really, that was not his MO. He was no Bill Clinton.
Yeah, definitely.
He was no George Bush, and I'm sure those who are Trump faithfuls appreciate the fact that that's the case. But
And so you think do you think that it's advisable for Biden to reach across the aisle?
well, to me, and you're talking to the eternal moderate, um, I believe that that's uh, it's the only productive thing to do in our particular type of democracy and our republic. And I think one of the questions you had posed, and we might be talking about a little farther down the road, like what if the division continues on, in the next 4 to 5 to 20 years. And to me, we always have a choice as people, as leaders. I always have a choice to either choose peace or choose conflict. And I here's you and I have actually talked about this before and had some fun discussions. I have a theory as to why I'm somewhat doubtful that things will improve, because my theory is a little more. I don't think it's a theory that I don't think is on the consciousness of a lot of people. I mean, I think they understand that there's a lot of stimuli. Let me first preface this by saying there's 3 reasons, in my opinion, that has increased the divide in our country, and it won't be what you think it is.
Good.
Here
I'm
it
all
is.
ears.
Well, simplistically speaking, I believe that it's the advent of cable television. It's the advent of talk radio. Liberals tried it; it didn't work very well. So I will say mostly conservative talk radio. Um, and the advent of the internet. You guys ever heard of the internet?
Heard a little bit about it.
Right. Now, this is an oversimplification, but my theory is, in 1965, if you wanted to watch, or let's say 1967, you wanted to get a report on Vietnam, you were going to get it from very few news outlets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were going to get it from Walter Cronkite. You're going to get it from ABC, NBC, CBS. Or maybe you pick up Newsweek. You would get the newspaper, your local newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Um,
And do you
And
think
so
that's
here's
do you think that that broadening of it is a good thing? Because from a lot of people's perspective, it's like that's scary. If information is very much monopolized in just a few sources, that
sure.
kind of gives a lot of power into very few
So
hands.
yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm definitely anti-monopoly, but I'm looking more at it from a system, like the system at the time.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know that at the time, these news outlets were thinking, yeah, great, we're monopoly, we can control it. Now I know there are those that believe that it was all left wing back then, and nothing's changed. Mainstream media has been left wing since 1965. I don't believe that personally. Now, I think maybe some people in the media tended to be a little more liberal. It's just the nature of those who get into show business,
Hmm.
and it's kind of journalism is, show business light. But in those times, I think there were more concrete sort of um, values, as far as being a reporter and reporting the news. But also, here's why I would say it's different: is that because there because we couldn't even conceive of all these myriads of information outlets, our entire national audience, these organizations, they had to present a product to the nation that was palatable to everybody,
Hmm.
right? Now, I honestly don't believe, generally speaking, that they were thinking in those days, we're going to craft this product to be like this. I really do believe, generally speaking, we're reporters, we're journalists, we're news, we're reporting what's going on in Vietnam, we're reporting what's going on, in the civil rights movement. Now, you get in a discussion that there was maybe some influencing, but they couldn't get too far one way or the other, or it just wouldn't have worked. It would have turned off a large, part of their audience. And of course, I think people weren't as far apart in those days either
Yeah.
politically. I mean, so, but that again is my theory that that's why we have become farther apart. So then
So
cable,
the idea is that back then, because everyone was kind of roughly in this, because the news source was trying to appeal to a broad audience of people, they presented a broad sort of perspective rather than now where it's like, okay, we're Fox News. We're not trying to appeal to the audience on the left. We're just trying to hit our target audience. And just like, it happens in business, you have a target customer. Is that kind of where you're going with it?
yeah, I mean, I don't think it was even conscious, but it was basically in their best interest to just provide the news, because I don't think it was anything that anyone sat in NBC News in 1967 and said, hey, let's create something where we have a moderator, and then we'll have panels. Let's take Anderson Cooper, or
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity, on those different networks. They design these. They could never have conceived of something like this, where they designed this something in the background. It looks like it's a newsroom, right? It's got the city behind them. They've got it set up to where it looks like an official newsroom, but it's nothing of the sort. These are customized products to appeal to their target audience. So, like Sean Hannity. I mean, Hannity and Combs that no longer exists. That was the last
I know that already.
Matisse
They don't even have
found.
the liberal on there anymore. Even though, yeah, no.
Yeah,
So real quick to kind of fall onto that and going back kind of to this polarized landscape. So if we have this environment that is polarizing us through the internet, through talk radio, that deliver these products to individual groups rather than kind of a broader discussion with better and more multiple perspectives, or anyway, tailored to individual groups, what do we do in this environment? Because it's obviously this polarization that we're seeing. We just had, for the people who want to say that Trump always a fluke or whatever, you have to remember 70 million Americans just voted for the man. Okay, that's more than Barack Obama in his first term. Now, it's true, more people voted against him, which means that people didn't. But that means you have a very big divide in the United States. Joe Biden says he wants to bridge it. You say reaching across the aisle is one way to do that. What do you think see, and this is where in theory, I agree with that. My problem is that from his perspective and from the perspective of the Democrats, what is the reaction of the more radical side of the party when you start trying to compromise with these evil Trump supporting Republicans? Do you think that he's going to be able, like, if you go and make friends with Mitch McConnell, that's going to piss off a lot of people in the Republican Party, or I'm sorry, in the Democrat Party. How does
anytime a president compromises on an issue or that issue, I mean, even Barack Obama got criticized on a few occasions for not maybe coming out strong enough, on maybe on some of these police violence issues, that were race related, and they wanted him to come out super, super aggressive, and and I think he understood that he was still trying to be a president. He was still trying to keep the calm. He wasn't trying to present it like, yeah, I have my own particular slant on this, but I'm still going to try to do what's diplomatic, and I'm not going to do something that's going to enrage the other side. But I was just thinking, I'm having a moment here.
No, you're fine.
But I just don't think that, I almost think all of that's irrelevant. I almost think it's all irrelevant whether
meaning the radical, like the reactions of the radical left isn't relevant.
It's almost as far as, and I think I'm going back to, are things going to get worse? How do we fix the divide? Or how do we find a better way to deal with the divide? I don't know how it's going to get worse. And I think, if you don't mind me kind of going back to I want to kind of finish up on that particular thought, was that, let's see.
So we're talking about media.
So I'm not used to doing this, but I think it's kind of like Spider-Man, that phrase, like, with great power comes great responsibility.
Uh-huh.
So we have this great irony, and I don't want to say irony, but dichotomy in a free country, right? Where we have, one of our most core values is a free press, right? The idea of having a state-run media is completely repulsive to us, and for a very good reason, right?
Yeah.
But the irony is that with that freedom, within a free capitalist society, just by very nature, and because of the things I mentioned, we've developed this extraordinary infrastructure of products that are information products. And as long as they exist, and as long as they're out there vying for their target audiences, I believe we'll just continue to have a big divide. Now, I don't think my solution is that we've got to eliminate all of them and we need to shut down the internet, and I don't think that's the solution either. And I don't think the solution is have a state-run media and shut down private media, which, some could make the argument Donald Trump was trying to do that, to his own preferences, by sort of, castigating the news and information that he felt was biased, and he would call it, fake news, and he would call it. So, he was in a way sort of delegitimizing and weakening the integrity of our media system by doing that, whether there's truth or not to some of his criticism. But I mean, that's my biggest concern, is that unless we can figure out some way of getting people to step outside of going to their own product, in which satisfies and satiates what they really like. I mean, I think I've even heard studies on when people tune into their favorite program, they're literally dopamine gets stimulated.
No,
if you're listening,
I can believe that. I myself know that when I ingest certain kinds of media, you have a visceral reaction to it because it either aligns or does not align with your values and your own confirmation biases that you have. That's actually, ironically, that's one of the reasons that I am kind of doing some of the things that I'm doing, where I try and have conversations with people who think differently than me. Because my hope is that as we begin to have a dialogue between ourselves, as individual citizens of different perspectives, we can begin to explore ideas, find common ground, and or not find common ground. So here's one of the things that I've it's
Can
kind
I
of a
can I just
oh go
can I
ahead.
say something there?
Yeah.
There are certain things that have become like they used to be parts of our national culture, part of our values. Things like let's be kind to each other, or let's find common ground. Another one that we don't hear very often is compromise is compromise, which has become a dirty word if you're playing hardball politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to compromise? We want to win,
Yep.
right? So those things now have been. I just don't see them as a big value in our society anymore. That we're going to try to find common ground with each other. You know, I was just thinking about this the other day that some people that I, whether it's on the far Trump side, you know, or whether it's on the far left side, if you're really able to sit down and talk with someone and say, well, let's talk about what we can actually agree on.
Mm-hmm.
I'll bet you could find more that you could agree on than what you disagree on.
And I agree with that when it comes to individual people. Here's where I get into I have a harder I'm actually fairly pessimistic about this whole situation, to be honest. I don't see a way out of it if unless there is some pretty radical shifts, um, with one side kind of giving in to the other. So here's what I mean by that. The issue is what happens when we have irreconcilable differences between the left and the right? What happens when we truly develop two different cultures within our own country? Two different sets of ideas about the way society should be. And they're not compatible. There is no middle ground. I mean, or the middle ground is very trivial. You know, I read an article about kind of this idea of the problem is that America doesn't really exist anymore. And it was a kind of a bold thing, so I read it. And basically the idea of it was this. In order to have a united society, there has to be something that unites them that's deeper than just, hey, we all share the same, Congress. There has to be some underlying philosophy or principles that we believe in. We may say, oh, well, we all believe in freedom. But if you go talk to someone on the left about what they mean by that and what someone on the right means by that, you're going to find that they don't even mean the same thing. And then you're going to find, talking about the American founding, people have a particular view of it, and other people have a totally different view of it. And you end up, the idea of what I look at with our political left-right dichotomy, I look at it like a marriage, okay? And in a good marriage, you kind of work with each other, you have your different preferences, but you work it out and everyone goes on with their business happily. But I honestly am getting to the point where I go, we haven't gotten violent yet. Neither of us have hit each other hard. There's been some verbal abuse that's gone back and forth between the spouses. But at what point do you start going, this may not be reconcilable and we got to find, an alternative, a division, a split, a divorce? And I'm not to that point yet, but
yeah.
But I don't think I'm that far away from it either. I'm closer than I ever thought I would be in my life, where I look around and I go, I don't know. I mean, if we can't solve this, the problem is that if you try and force people together that really don't want to be together, that really truly despise each other, that are just trying to win, eventually it can get violent. It can get ugly. And nations historically and peoples have divided in order to avoid violence because if you're forced to be together, then you'll fight for whoever gets the power because it becomes that important. Anyway.
So here's a question for you. Is it because the ideological beliefs are so far apart, or is it because of something different?
For the individual, like you and me, left and right side of the spectrum, our ideological differences probably are much smaller. However, when you get into because people are a combination of both ideologies to some extent, but as more people,
we're two white guys that live in the suburbs.
What was that?
We're two white middle class white guys living in the suburbs.
Exactly, something like that. But I also would say though that when you really get into the ideologies themselves, right? Here's a good analogy that I heard someone give. They say your average Catholic is not a theologian. They go to church, they do the things that they're supposed to do because they want to be a good person. Your average political person is like that too. They just go along with their political party. They kind of roughly understand the beliefs, but they aren't really deep into the theology. If you want to find the theologians, there are Catholic theologians, and you can really learn a lot about the deeper philosophy undergirding all of it rather than just the way people kind of express the faith. The same thing goes in politics. If you go and read the real deep thought of the left's intelligentsia, and then you go read the intelligentsia on the right, their ideological divides are night and day. I mean, incompatible as can be. And so we've always had, in the United States, the way I see it, we always kind of had the founding vision of the nation and the Constitution, and we all sort of shared that historically in the United States. We had different ideas about how it should be applied, but there was much more of an understanding of what it was, and we all kind of were on that same page. I feel like we're getting to a point now that the left and right view those founding ideas so much differently, and some even with hostility, at least on the left. And on the right, maybe overly, tight to them or overly conservative. But again,
overly originalist.
Overly originalist, if you want to say it that way. And I tend to be more of a religionist. We probably, but the thing is, you and I, we both probably have a respect and an understanding that these founding kind of principles can unite you and I. But I think as you get farther out to the fringes of our political sides of the equation, you start to lose that. I mean, I don't have almost anything in common with the vision of America of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, just as you probably don't have anything in common with Steve Bannon.
Let me ask you this, because you say you don't think you have anything common with her. Do you believe that she believes that the three branches of government should be dismantled?
Do I think she thinks that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that she does. I believe that she wants to it isn't necessarily the structure of the government, it's the vision of what government is for and what it should do.
Okay. So you already agree that you both agree in our system of government. Is a general rule.
So yes, to some extent. To some extent. But she's willing to pack the court. She's willing to add new states if it gives her side more power.
You both believe in that branch of government, to have a judicial branch of the government?
Yeah. But we have very different. We have very different. Oh, go ahead.
You both honor the tradition of the executive branch and Congress. You both honor that. You both value the process in which that works.
Yes.
Although you may not like the way it's worked for you recently, but I mean, my guess is you guys are probably in agreement on that.
So I would say yes, but I also would say, though, that's not enough to have a united country. What ends up happening is that the problem is the underlying ideology of what you want to use the power for. And there's always been disagreements with that to some extent. And that's in any society, you're going to have that. My issue that I run into is the visions for the country become so different that it really becomes more of we have to win this. Because if we don't win this, like the Second Amendment, they're going to, if they had won the Senate and they pack the court and they add new states and they give amnesty to 120 or to 200 million illegal immigrants, they get added almost entirely to the Democrat voter rolls. The Republican Party loses all chance of power and re-election. And then they begin to do things like pass, assault weapons, mandatory buybacks of assault weapons. And
but see, this sounds to me like the fear of someone on the far right. And And
But it's legit. I mean, are
I'm
we
just
are we
being,
saying that those aren't things that
I'm
they've said
just,
they want to do?
well, here's the thing though. I mean, what have you seen with the appointing of Supreme Court justices in during Trump's tenure? Now, I believe he did it all absolutely legally according to our Constitution. I don't think there's anything incorrect about what he did. But there are those that are just freaking out about it, right? Because now he's put a 6-3 majority in the court that's a conservative leaning court. A lot of people see that as, oh my gosh, you're going to turn back Roe v. Wade. You know, you're going to turn back marriage
I think
equality.
I think Roe
You're
v.
going to do
Wade
all
should
these.
be overturned.
Sure, and you know what? I'm because I am a moderate. I'm very much pro-life. I'm not
I just
hardcore.
think what's funny is with Roe v. Wade specifically, and we could probably get into the weeds on all this stuff. With Roe v. Wade specifically, just a little side note, it just would go back to the states. I just don't think that it's from a
Sure,
constitutional perspective, you just can't
but
make
to
the
that,
argument
but
that
we've
it,
had Roe v. Wade now for what, 50 years?
yeah,
How long has it been?
yeah, about that.
Less than 50 years. So I mean, we've existed in that world for a little less than 50 years. So to them, what you're proposing is kind of radical, you know, or the idea that, you know, we need to take this back and we need to, you know, put it all back in the hands of the state.
Well, and
So yeah, I
we'll
mean, it's federalism versus states. But I think where I'm going with this is as soon, and here's what I have to say, kind of in summation, is the moment we tell ourselves that I don't think that we can live together. I don't think we can have a marriage with two people with very differing opinions. It's like a Mormon being married to an atheist. You know,
mhm.
you know. I mean, that's a little too close to home, but I mean, let's say it's a
No,
Mormon.
no, it's an
You
apt
know,
analogy.
because I know a lot of people are like far left. They're now kind of a godless crew, right? but anyways, yeah, it's like two marriages with two different. It's who are the famous two people? Who's the guy who's bald, who's a Democrat, and he's married to Mary Madeline?
Oh shoot, I can't remember.
Uh, I forget what his
Well,
name
well,
is.
well. But here's a question:
So,
when is a divorce in order?
well, I mean, you know, ask Mary Madeline and James, whatever his name is. When are you guys going to get a divorce? You guys
See,
have completely different political beliefs, and you live in the same damn house.
see, but that's the thing. I honestly, I think
So
everyone
I,
has their preference. My thing is that I think that we're getting closer and closer to that preference because it isn't just like, okay, we have our divides and we've worked them out, because a lot of people, that's what they do. And I'm for trying to work it out. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not sitting here calling for, secession and a breakup of the union. However, I think two things. One, I think we should recognize that we need to solve this or that's where we're headed. And two, we should make it known that there is a peaceful exit. Okay? In my mind, what I worry about is violent revolution.
never, never sell me on that.
On the possibility of
The
dividing the nation.
concept of, yeah, no, I would never even remotely think that that's a good idea.
Would you allow a state to leave if they chose to? Or would you use military force to keep them in the union because you're like, I'm sending troops in and we're going to make you do the way that
Well,
we
I mean,
want
you
to?
know, I think history is replete with examples of once people cannot solve their conflicts to where, you know, and most of the time it's not a pretty process, right? It's kind of an ugly process. I can't think of too many situations. Maybe when Soviet Union, you know, went bankrupt back in the 90s, there was sort of a peaceful splitting up. You know, it was more
Well,
geographical.
and
More
generally that's because people
geographical.
are trying to take over portions of
Wasn't
countries to have for their own, and the main country doesn't.
wasn't
Our
it
system.
wasn't
Oh, go ahead.
it wasn't ideological. It wasn't like when the Soviet Union, you know, uh, I don't, for lack of better words, went bankrupt and they allowed the Czechoslovakia and you know and some of the other countries um, to split off. It wasn't because they had a divide of two parties. I mean, can you imagine the chaos of something like that? I mean, even in
Perhaps,
our
but I would also say this. And the only reason I'm bringing this up, I'm not advocating for it. First of all, I think we should try and work out our marital problems. But I
You're
think
just
that,
like putting your toe in the water with it.
well, no, and I am. And here's the reason why I put my toe in the water with it as a potential solution to the problem, because the other thing is violence in my mind. Okay, it's either we divorce or we're forced into the same house and we start killing each other to get control and
So,
power.
so
And
let's
that is
just talk.
something that I
Let's talk
worry
about.
could, because where is the end of this? If we're going to be divided and the polarization just gets worse and worse, there are people on the left and there are people on the right who right now have violence on their mind of like, hey, if we're disenfranchised, we need to fight.
Well, I think if Trump had won, barring any major court miracle, had he won, I think that probably the protests and the violence would have been worse
And
from
could be
from the.
worse if the court thing happens now. Holy smokes.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm
and
really
that,
scared of that.
no, I saw you write that. But here's a question for you. Like, just logistically speaking and practically speaking, Arizona is clearly kind of now right down the middle, right? And you've seen a few other states that have decided this election, they're right down the middle. So let's just say you believe that's the only solution, it's the best solution. How would that work logistically? I mean, how would you do that?
So the way I view it is
He's
that states would have to have a conversation within their own states. In the state of Nevada, for instance, where I live, rural Nevada is very much part of the. It is very, very Republican, all that. But once you start to get down to certain areas, yeah, they would have to decide which side of the fence they're going to be on. And they may divide up their state to where here's so like Southern Nevada would probably end up being part of California and the blue state union, and then the red state union would be a different union, and it would have to work itself out. Don't get me wrong, this would be a complicated process. However, the idea is, remember, our country was founded on the idea that secession is legitimate. I mean, that's what the states were. They were seceding from the power that they felt had been totally monopolized and was being used against them. And so the colonies said, we're going to do our own thing. Now, the question is, we think, yeah, they should have been let leave peacefully, but the British sent troops. Okay. I'm a believer that you don't send troops. If California wants to go do its own thing, we let California go do its own thing. And if Oregon and Washington want to join them and they want to form their own union, by all means, and we can engage in, and the way I see it playing out, honestly, is like a European Union, where the United States becomes broken up into different federal governments, maybe 2, maybe 3, who knows? And then we all still engage in trade and free movement, and we're all still allies, but we just have very different styles of government within this union of people that are relatively, similar. I don't think you're going to have,
so
the red states invading the blue states.
What you're basically acquiescing to is the great experiment is dead. So
no, I don't. I would say that the great
let's just say,
experiment. Yeah, I mean,
let's just say
go ahead.
Let's say Reno breaks off. They become their own state. It's like the little Rhode Island version of Nevada, but because that's a little sliver part. But let's say Reno now is their own state. And 50 years later, people in Reno are just not seeing eye to eye. I guess one half of Reno's got to secede from the other half of Reno.
It's a possibility. Or people. What would more likely what would happen is that people would move. Okay. If I know for right now, if Nevada as a whole joined the blue state union, I'd move to another state. I'd move to a red state because I'd just be like this. I mean, it's already happening. We already sort of have this system within federalism. And and the only difference is now we say the federal government has been taken over. So we basically create a new federal government for a collection of states. So
let's just say after a while, Reno becomes blue after another 20 years. People start moving into Reno and they, just like they did in Arizona, right?
Yeah.
They turn it blue. What do you do then?
Well,
do you split it up again? Do you drive them out?
It isn't necessary. So there's a difference between when people are willing to stay in a place and kind of deal with the government that is there. But yeah, when it gets bad enough, people generally will move. Okay. The problem is that there's a difference between moving from Reno to Arizona, or from Nevada to Arizona, and moving from Nevada to England. Okay. Because you're right. If you're ever fed up with the United States, you could technically get up and leave. But the idea is that Americans don't want to leave America, to leave, we believe that this is our country, but federalism was designed to allow for people to have multiple kind of variations of the government, and the federal government was only really supposed to do fairly limited things. And now we have this, the federal government has grown in power. You have people now fighting over that, and now we're reaching a point where it's so polarized that I honestly worry that unless we make some changes, which I hope we can do, I'm only saying that this discussion we need to not run away from it, because it may become the only alternative in order to avoid violence.
What are those changes that you believe that we need to make?
I think ideologically we need to.
And would you say that ideology is kind of more in the area of what you believe?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think
I propose that that's the problem right there.
Well, but I would say this. Okay, what are we? We are the United States of America. What is America? We need to have an introspection into what is this country. This country was built on certain foundational principles and ideas and structures and systems. And when those who don't respect those are not Americans and should be like rejected by all of us.
What those are subjective according to your own ideology, and B, when
I
you
don't know
call
that they're
someone
subjective.
an American,
I mean, I think we can interpret them to some extent, but
that's back to the concept of a living document versus originalism, right? And so, if you're a very entrenched originalist, or far left, and you don't respect any of the originalist intents, and you basically have this idea, hey, look, if someone wants to exist in this society, that is a pure originalist, there's no place for you here.
Well, there are degrees of it, right? I think that people can you can have some variation within an originalist framework, but remember, when you start to get into the extremes, especially the extremes that we're seeing in the left, where the Constitution it's interpreted to mean whatever the heck we want it to mean, right? The document loses all power and purpose, and literally.
That's a little flippant.
I don't know. The Roe v. Wade decision when they're talking about the penumbras of the Constitution, that has nothing to do with what the founders actually meant or intended with that. You end up.
I'm just curious.
Go ahead.
Let's go back to what you were saying about we need to find a solution, and the solution is to change the ideology. So I think you're kind of in a place where it's like, we need to change the ideology of those who don't see it the way I do, which is a much more originalist, conservative, traditional, not traditional, but, founding fathers, yada, 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 yada. Exactly the way I do on the originalist side.
I don't know that I would say exactly. Okay. I think that there are, I think that everything needs to, it isn't so much that they have to necessarily agree with me on every single thing. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the conversation has to be framed in, like, the way we judge if a person's argument is good is that they make some sort of an appeal to, whether it's to the Constitution, to the founding principles. But we have people openly rejecting the founding principles and the founding ideology, and not only that, being taught that in universities and in other places. And once you get to that point that you have a deconstructionist philosophy, deconstructing all of the institutions because they're systemically racist and evil to the core, and we got to change the whole system because we need to fundamentally change the United States. I'm like, wait a minute here. I signed up to be in the United States. If you fundamentally change it, which is what literally their words, they want to the fundamentals of this country? This is not grandpa's Democrat Party. Okay, these people want to fundamentally change the country, and if that continues, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a reaction to that on the right, where we're going, whoa, we got into this marriage under a particular understanding of what this marriage is about, and it's about these founding principles.
Who do we?
Who's we?
Yeah, we got into this marriage. You're referring to those who view it the way you do,
with
right?
our fellow Americans, essentially, whether that whoever that is. The problem is, it's like, we enter a marriage. I enter a marriage with someone, and we have an understanding that we're going to be faithful to each other sexually, and then all of a sudden, what was that?
It's James Carville.
That's right, James Carville. I actually like James Carville. And
he's a funny liberal, though.
I know. I have a lot of liberals that I like, a lot of Democrats. But you got to remember, I look at a lot of moderate Democrats.
They're in a different.
Well, here's what I see. Okay, I look at you. I look at people like Carville and stuff. We can have our disagreements politically and stuff, but at the end of the day, you and I still frame the conversation in the same way. We still kind of have this respect for the United States of America. And I honestly believe that there is 20% of the Democrat Party that are full on, they don't, and they're growing. And they're being said that these people are the future of the party. And, you look at your candidates in the primary, they weren't a bunch of Joe Bidens, and so what I see and what we are reacting to is, hey, these people, it's kind of like a marriage. Again, if I had an agreement with someone that we were going to be sexually faithful, and then they start saying, well, the way I interpret that is that I can have a boyfriend, I just can't have sex with him. I can kiss him. It's kind of there in the penumbras of our marital agreement. And at some point you go, this ain't what I signed up for. And so what we're worried about is that if those people on that side truly gain significant power, that they are going to want to fundamentally alter the institutions of government to implement. You have people talking about truth and, he was in the Clinton administration, Robert Reich, and he's talking about truth and reconciliation commissions where they start going and listing out the people that were Trump supporters and that contributed to his presidency. And it's like, what? It's crazy.
So I sense some frustration, Jacob.
Definitely.
So
I'll be straight up honest. I am the radical left is terrifying to me, and they're the end of the world.
I would propose, and I think there are people that are farther right than you, but I would propose that you're pretty far to the right. But I will say this, that you're a person who's pretty rational in his far to the right.
I would say on the political spectrum, I sit pretty well in the dead middle of the right. I'm sitting right around Ben Shapiro, Ted Cruz, that sort of I'm not in the world of, Breitbart and, Steve Bannon and, really getting over there in the QAnon type, I'm not there. And I'm not, but I'm also not with Mitt Romney.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so if there's 20% that you believe are such a radical threat from the left, what percentage would you say is a problem on the far right? That are more, they're causing more problems than helping, that are creating more contempt and more,
So here's what I see by the people on the far right. They generally are reactionaries to the far left. Okay. I don't see them as much right now as people driven by a particular ideology like the left is. The left are driven by radical Marxist theories taught in universities. The people on the farther fringes of the right tend to be people who are afraid of the radical left. And to some extent with good reason. The people on the far right, though, and I would say probably 20% of ours are like this. Their thing is that they're like conspiracy theorists. They see globalists are taking over the world. Alex Jones, they're listening to him, and it's kind of they have just a lot of weird ideas. Okay, but they're fairly. Every group has its kooks. okay? And we have our kooks. But the difference is that our kooks don't have an ideology behind them that has been shown already to lead to the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, okay? Marxist, authoritarian leftists do. And so in my mind, I'm a lot more afraid of people on the radical left than some fringe loonies on the right, who, by the way, nobody likes, okay? We're embarrassed by them, and most of the time. And now, not to say there aren't things they say that are true. I'll even say that even people on the radical left, even Karl Marx had things to say that were worth considering, okay? And there are things there, so I'm not totally shut off and shut-minded to anybody else. But what I will say is that the problems with radicalism on the right aren't even the ones that the left says that we have, okay? Like white supremacists, like, that we're all a bunch of white supremacists who want to, take black people. It's like, that's not even close to what we want, okay? And so there's a lot of misinformation about the far right, because I don't consider people that are white nationalists, neo-Nazis, like those people aren't on the right, okay? We reject them entirely. Totally, 100%. What bothers me is that people who are essentially Marxists aren't rejected on the left.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now we know where you stand.
Well, what do you?
And now we know how you feel about portions of the left. And look, it's not. I'm not saying that it's not legitimate concern and fear. I mean, I have similar concerns. AOC is. I agree. She's kind of way out there. And because I said before, I'm moderate. So here's a question.
Uh-huh.
You talk pretty passionately about this 20%.
Mm-hmm.
And you believe it's going to grow and that sort of thing. Does that mean that there's still an 80%?
Yes.
That's not part of the AOC group.
So here's the interesting thing, and where some people on the right will disagree with me, and I have to go and tell everybody, calm the freak down. Okay, they get the idea that the Democrats are all AOC. Okay, and I'm like, no, guys, no. Remember, Bernie Sanders lost. Joe Biden was the one they picked. The Democrats are not as radical as people think. Democrats. So go ahead.
Here's my, and this is more humorous, tongue in cheek, but I think there's truth in it. I think that it's usually about 5 or 10% of those on the far side of either side that cause most of the problems.
I would tend to agree.
And that's probably true for human nature in almost any organization. There's always that 5 or 10% that make the most noise.
Actually, I think it's the Pareto principle is 80-20 split.
Yeah,
I think I was a little closer.
I didn't want to say 20 because it might be true, but I want to have a little more faith that most people really would choose to take a peaceful approach to things. So
yeah, and I'm not saying, I wouldn't say AOC. I would say that the violent ones, like the truly ones that are like crazy and violent, I would say they're even smaller than 5% on the Democrats.
So half of the problem is that 10 or 20% making the most noise, getting the most attention. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're hearing and consuming and seeing all the time.
Yep.
And B, those who are in that center part, they've become sort of alienated. And also they've become castigated as being lukewarm, being moderates. That's become, again, back to what I was saying about certain things are dirty words now. Compromise is a dirty word. Being a moderate, having a moderate approach. I don't think you just have to be a moderate, but have a moderate approach to something, a moderate approach to policy, a moderate approach to, as far as your how you interact politically, taking a moderate approach. I would propose, this would be very debatable, and I don't know if this is quite where I wanted to go. But Barack Obama, some people would probably see him as having a pretty left agenda, but I would say that his approach was the way he went about things didn't stoke those 5 and 10% on either side, those 10 or 20%, didn't stoke the fires of that as much. And this is where you and I we actually probably would agree on this. My opinion is I don't know that Donald Trump's policies, there are a few that I think were really, really erroneous from my own political perspective. But I think his to me, when you're talking about this issue of now you're going to get it from you're going to get it from the anti-Trump side of things.
That's
But
right.
to me, it wasn't really his policies as much as his the way he presented himself, the words that he used. My mom always used to tell me words matter,
Hmm.
and you know, the old thing, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Well, that's bull
So
crap.
the idea being that
So
he was driving the division.
I think that he was a inflammatory. What do they call it? Gaslighting. I think he was like the ultimate gaslighter for 4 years. And and the funny thing is, if he just kept his damn mouth shut and just went about his business and talked in a way that was respectful to human beings, and didn't make it about him all the time, and he just made it about policy. Like Ted Cruz, to me, I believe is just as conservative, if not more conservative than Donald Trump. I think Ted Cruz would be more conservative on the budget than
Hmm.
Donald Trump was.
Absolutely.
But but Ted Cruz, I believe, if he were in office, he would still conduct himself in a way. Sure, some people will still hate him. There's no way around that. But he would not be a gaslighter like Donald Trump was. I think Donald Trump set an example for the left as well. I think what you're seeing on some, as far as the riots, things like that, I think it's a reaction to some of that. Now, I
And
don't
I
think.
would no, and I know that now. One thing that I would say, I would even go a step back. I'll give you kind of the right's perspective of the pre-Trump era and why we saw Trump, and we actually to some extent enjoyed and were happy about his sticking it to the people. So for the longest time on the right, we've been losing. Okay, Bush was a total disaster. So my whole life, I mean, Clinton was very popular. Barack Obama kind of had his thing. He was very popular. And not only
I
that, the
respect.
left's agenda was moving forward, right? The country was moving that direction. And maybe on some issues, that's a good thing, okay? I don't necessarily have a problem with everything that has happened over the past, my lifetime politically. However, there's no doubt that we felt like, okay, we're moving. We're always losing. And then comes this guy who goes in and people finally kind of got to the point where they felt like we have these real nice, smooth talking politicians. And now you're going to put some corrupt person like Hillary Clinton in there. And it's no, we're not going to have any more of this. These political insiders, these shady deals that they're all making. It's like, we don't like this. We want something totally different. We're going to throw a grenade into the thing, and that's what he was. But here's what's crazy: Trump goes in there like a bull in a china shop, and Ben Shapiro actually has a funny thing he says. He's a hammer looking for a nail. Right? He's just punching everything in sight. And sometimes he hits somebody who deserves to be punched. He breaks something that needed to be broken. And sometimes he hits a baby. And so when we're all happy when he hits the right thing, and we're all going, oh, when he hits the baby, right? And so, but so many people wanted the whole political world to be shaken, and that's what he did. Well, here's the thing. Now, in my opinion, Trump actually created a whole new political order around him. The right was unified behind him as kind of like, this is our guy. He's doing it. We're actually winning. We've never won. This is the first time in my life I've ever seen the right winning. I'm excited about this. We're stopping the slow march towards the left's agenda. And then, and the left became unified around this hatred for him. And now he's gone.
I'm just curious if there were an equivalent to Donald Trump on the left. How would that have been? How palatable would that have been? Someone with that abrasive, someone that just rubbed it in the faces of the right. Like, we're winning, we're finally winning. We're gonna
Yeah,
shove this down your frickin' throats. You know,
I
and you're gonna
it would inflame the
hate it, and I don't care.
so
I think it would cause more contempt.
it would. It would. It would. And I don't necessarily think I think that he could have won the victories without the vitriol. I don't necessarily agree with that. But also,
So
as a,
did you win? But see, that's, you and I have had discussions so many times that, and now we are talking about division in the country. That's kind of our original topic, and that is, um, you can win for a season, but what are you left with afterwards? And and so, you might have got those Supreme Court seats set, and I'm fine with it. I think that he had every right to appoint conservative Supreme Court justices. He was the, legally elected president of the United States. But it's how he went about it that I think was the biggest problem. If he had stood up in front of people and said, I know that this is going to be a difficult issue for a lot of people. These are my values and my beliefs. I feel strong about it. And it came across as someone that was genuine and humble. If it were Mike Pence, they'd probably still dislike him. But I think he would come across at least sincere and
well,
genuine.
and I mean,
But
and I
maybe the
think obviously
division would
we
still
could
be
go
there.
into the whole Supreme Court thing into a lot of detail. And regardless of any of that, if he goes through and pushes through his justices or his agenda or whatever, and we win, the thing is, the left has never lost in a significant way before, in any way on policy. Okay, they just haven't. And any gains that Republicans made were these tepid, weak, nothing burgers. And Trump really goes in and starts to actually make some gains. Remember, the left freaked out because for the first time ever, they actually were being they got hit back. And to me, it was sort of like, you guys are getting what we've always got of feeling like you're losing the battle. Now, his style could have been better. I don't have any problem with that. But ultimately, at this point, he's out of the picture. And so we're left with the division. We want to heal it. But here's what's funny.
I don't think he's out of the picture, though.
I don't think he's out of the
You
picture.
just mentioned that he created a whole new ideology within the Republican Party, or at least a whole new
A movement.
movement. There you go.
So, but here's what I would say. I agree, but I don't think. Let's put it this way: the left is in big trouble. Okay, in my opinion, the Democrats have a massive problem on their hands because Joe Biden is promising to be this healer in chief. This I'm gonna bring everybody together, and everybody knows he's not gonna do it, and there's no chance he's gonna do it.
Does everybody know that?
Well, okay, I should actually say no. They don't know that,
I think
but
there are people like you that are or at least you're not hoping for it, but you're predicting it.
I'm predicting it because of this. Because if he tries to reach across the aisle, the radicals in his party will go nuts. And he has to pander to them, or he has no chance and his party is going to push him to satisfy the party. The problem is that radical wing of your party, of the Democrat Party. Oh, I say your party. I guess I shouldn't have said. I know you're not a hard party man. Did my video just stop?
Do you like an hour?
Oh, you got a different one here. My video just stopped on my end. Hold on here 1 second. We're going to break this up and we're going to do this in a 2-part series. So we'll wrap this one up and we'll continue it on the next one.
Are we off the air?